A shriek tore through the trees. High, piercing, like a hawk hit in flight. The mountain man stood still where he was, every muscle taut, air frozen in his chest. He'd spent enough time in these woods to distinguish between the howl of an animal and the howl of a human heart. This one was no beast. It was human, delicate, shattered, weighed down with more than pain. Without hesitation, his rifle came down. Instinct drove him closer, more powerful than caution. The sound brought him to her, lying on the forest floor among pine needles darkened with blood. A young native woman, barely 25. She clamped a shaking hand against her side, red spreading through tattered clothing and broken beads. When his shadow lay across her, her eyes popped open, ferocious, relentless, even as her body shuddered with loss and fatigue. She croaked a syllable he didn't recognize, but its message was unmistakable. Leave me. But he couldn't. Not when the ground beside her spoke its tale. Boot prints in the muck, snapped branches in haste, blood still wet. She hadn't fallen. She'd run. She was pursued, hurt, betrayed. He stooped low, his coarse hand hesitating near, afraid to touch her as if even the softness of his fingers would shatter her final fragment of strength. She pulled away, incredulity blazing in her eyes, her breath hitching and shallow. She was the type of woman who would die alone before she begged for sympathy. He finally spoke, his voice low, deep as the mountain roots themselves. Not a request, not a demand, just a promise. I won't leave you alone. The words fell out of his mouth before he could stop them, born on something ancient to words, something ancient to hate, between her folk and his people. Her eyes steadied, though disbelief quivered on her lips. And although she resisted with her body, he picked her up into his arms. She was too light, her bones acrid beneath skin grown hard by work and mourning. He walked through the storm, the wind screaming at him, sleet slashing through the branches, smoke thin on the air. Men's voices echoed behind them, faintly. Whoever had hurt her was still near. His cabin materialized finally, a black shape hugging the mountainside. He knew that he shouldn't have done it. Survival required no strangers, no foes, no weight to hold him back when danger closed in. But leaving her dying out there cut deeper than any knife. Hefting the door open, he bore her over the threshold and set her beside the burning fire. Even so, she protested, her pride searing more intensely than her injury. She battled his bandages with shaking hands, uttering words immersed in rage and grief. He said nothing. He allowed silence to answer, the silence of a man who had lived too long in only shadow company. Silence that at times healed more than words. Gently, he wrapped her wound, gave her water without command, his fingers steady and uncomplaining. Beyond the walls, the storm grew darker. Snow lashed against the walls, shutters creaked, night weighed heavily. She tensed on the pallet, expecting treachery, murmuring shreds between shallow gasps. Names of the dead, imprecations against the men who pursued her. He did not speak, merely listened. Her tale was already inscribed on the scars along her arm, in the way she winced when the wind picked up distant sounds. When the wolves were heard to howl in the distance, her eyes opened instantly, fear raw and unshielded. For a fleeting instant, trust flickered between them. He leaned in close, voice softer now, barely a prayer. I won't leave you alone. She didn't thank him. Maybe the world had taken too much from her for thanks to live. But when he tightened her bandage, she didn't push his hand aside. When his shadow crossed over her, she didn't shrink back. That tiny yielding was enough. And then the noise he'd been waiting to hear. Boots stomping in the icy earth. Voices, distant but close, ransacking the storm. The hunters had picked up their scent. His cabin walls wouldn't keep her secret for long, and the fire smoke would give them away. Brake stood up, rifle held. Brake in hand, every fiber tight. Brake, his eyes fixed on the door where the lamplight filtered through the cracks. She stirred weakly behind him, trying to say something, but her voice cracked before words could emerge. The storm howled, the flames crackled, and the cabin creaked as if it too were holding its breath. he whispered his promise for the final time. Firm, unflinching, as solid as the mountain that shielded them. "I won't leave you alone." Those words hung in the cabin, no longer merely solace. They had become a refrain he could not withdraw from, an oath cut into stone. The storm raging outside would not soon blow over. Winter dug its claws deeply into the mountains, and for weeks on end, merciless, their whole universe was the cabin. Every morning, the mountain man arose tired but unyielding, venturing forth into the blinding snow with rifle in his hand. He stalked through the cutting winds, returning at times with rabbit, squirrel, at times with nothing. But whatever his hands were empty of, his first action was always the same. He knelt beside her, caring for the wound that hung on to her tenaciously, monitoring her fever, ensuring her spirit did not escape into the emptiness of the wilderness. Initially, she greeted his concern with silence, her pride unwilling to yield, although her weak body betrayed her. He never quarreled. He made no speeches, no great promises, merely presence. Calloused fingers, roughened by survival, stroked her bruised flesh gently. His level gaze spoke to her more strongly than words. He did not perceive her as a burden, but as a life that needed to be safeguarded. Through the many nights, as the wind howled outside the walls of the cabin, she would not sleep, her ears tuned to the cadence of his breathing, firm, unvarying as earth, while he sat in a chair at her bedside. And when sickness claimed her, searing away the last of her strength, she felt his hand cool against her forehead. His words were low, not with orders, but in shattered pieces of prayer, muttered nearly in embarrassment to say them. The fever almost took her away. In her delirium, she beheld him cry. It shocked her more than the hurt, that this man, worn by loneliness and tempered by survival, would cry for her. He believed she slept, but her eyes opened briefly long enough to see the salt spark on his cheek, the quiet shattering of a man who thought no eyes beheld him. She never mentioned it, but when the fever at last broke, she bore that memory deep. When snow thinned and days lengthened, something delicate realigned between them. She sat beside the fire now, sewing fabric with shaking fingers, while he labored outdoors chopping wood. Her quiet moderated, no longer edged with suspicion. Occasionally, as he handed her a bowl of soup or added another log to the fire, their hands touched. Once, when a gale screamed loudest, she started to sing a tune of her people. The music broke with tragedy, but she sustained it. He sat motionless, face to the fire, and despite not knowing the words, allowed her singing to fill the cabin. Spring pushed against the earth, and with it there was choice. She walked once more in the pines, slowly but steadily, her body battered but mending. Her gaze would often return to the horizon, where her people were waiting, where duty had spoken she was to go back. But each time, her eyes failed her, torn between the horizon's promise and the cabin she now knew as shelter. He spoke not a word. His silence was a question he would never compel her to answer. But peace in the wilderness is as fragile as glass. Smoke had arisen one night across the creek. Then came the sounds of voices, the voices of men. Hunters, maybe her family, maybe the ones who had pursued her life before. The snapping of twigs moved closer, and her body stiffened, recalling the night she bled into the snow. The mountain man moved to her side, rifle at the ready, jaw set in stone. But for the first time she took the lead, her scrawny frame positioned between him and the threat. Her hand went up, shaking but firm, as if she could protect him with nothing more than her determination. Figures materialized at the tree-lean, shrouded in twilight. One shouted her name, rough, authoritative. She winced, but did not stir. Instead, she sought the mountain man's arm, fingers closing around it tightly, anchoring herself. Her voice, rough but unshakable, cut through the trees. She informed them she would not come back, that the life she had known no longer retained her. The silence that ensued was oppressive, punctuated only by the crackle of the fire and the restless breeze. The hunters shifted uncomfortably. It was maybe the rifle in his hands, maybe the fire burning in her eyes, Whatever it was, it kept them at bay. They turned away one by one, disappearing into the forest until dusk engulfed them. She stood shaking, her hand still on his arm. He gazed at her, inexperienced in matters of the heart, and saw no need for words. Her decision was clear. She remained, not because she was not strong enough to depart, but because she had made the choice to stay. The air stung with pine, spring buds bursting open, life coming back to the mountain. She tilted her face to him, her eyes containing not gratitude, not pity, but something more. The start of trust born only in pain shared together. He laid his rifle down, his hand touching hers. No words existed, but none were necessary. For they had found something through hunger, storms, and the brink of death that each had not sought. Not rescue, not duty, but the tender germ of belonging. The storm had not claimed them. The hunters had not shattered them. And when the final snow turned to earth, she remained, because she had discovered not merely refuge, but something that seemed home.